Our guest today is Larry Shenk, longtime Phillies PR maven and retired Vice President of Alumni Relations with the Phillies. He joins us today. We're grateful to have him. Larry, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing fine. How about you?
Doing just fine. How did you get through the summer last year with no baseball until late July?
It was very difficult because it's been a part of my life for so long, everybody's life, but we were in a situation that was really different. So I was glad when baseball did come back, and I'm really glad this year that the minor leagues are back and everything, because kids have dreams of playing in the big leagues, and they couldn't play it all last year.
Yep.
And you know that better than I do from living with them, in Lakewood. And it's so great to have it back. I think it's good for the country, and hopefully we're over the hump.
Did you grow up thinking that someday you wanted to play baseball, work in baseball? How did you end up with the Phillies?
I couldn't play baseball. I tried, but I wasn't very good. You know the 5 tools that you have? I had zero.
Me too. Yeah.
My dream was to be a broadcaster in baseball, but that wasn't going to happen, I guess. So I graduated from college with an elementary degree in education. But I went to work at a local newspaper and did some sports and did everything else. And then I wound up in Wilmington, Delaware, in the sports department covering high school sports in Delaware. And 3 years in a row, the Phillies PR job opened up. I applied in 61, 62, and 63. 63, I was in Wilmington, and I had an interview. I was at the right place at the right time. They offered me the job, and the rest is history.
So I guess the answer is probably everything, but how was it? How was your job a lot different at the beginning back then compared to, when you finally retired?
We didn't have podcasts back then.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
It was totally different because the print was the big thing back in the days when I started. My first year was 64. We had 5 newspapers that covered us home and away. All the games were not on TV at the time. They were on the radio. And over the course of time, it changed. And the way you communicated with the media changed. Initially, it was all phone calls, and then you wanted press conferences. And now you can send out a tweet or an email within seconds and reach hundreds of people at one time. So it's much more easy that way, but in a way it's not, because you have social media, which can be a plus, it can be a minus.
Oh, for sure. So let's start. 1964 was obviously it was a good season, and then a tough finish for the Phillies. So you really jumped right in there with both feet, with one of what unfortunately became one of the more historic Phillies teams ever.
Yep. I was a fan, and we're in first place, now we're planning for a World Series. I had no idea what we were doing. And I was, I got chewed out by the treasurer one time attending a meeting. I wasn't taking enough notes on what we had to do, because we had to accommodate the media for the World Series. I think it was CBS TV at the time. And of course, Connie Mack Stadium was very antiquated. We didn't have great facilities. I guess one of my favorite stories from that year is we needed the ballroom at the Warwick Hotel for a World Series party the night before the first game. And I went with a couple of other executives, the Phillies. We went down and met with the general manager. He says, well, the ballroom is booked for a wedding that night, and we can't do that. So my boss, Frank Powell, said, where is the owner? They said, the owner is in France on vacation. He says, get him on the phone. So they got him on the phone and explained everything, and they bounced the wedding out of the hotel, and we never made the World Series. So I don't know whether the wedding took place or didn't. We had a 6.5 game lead with 10 games to go, or 12 games to go, and everything went wrong for 10 games, and we lost the pennant. We lost the chance to go to the World Series. We had printed the World Series tickets. We had distributed them, but it didn't work out that way.
So you get to spring training in 65. Was there kind of like a hangover from 64?
There was a little bit. Gene Mauch was our manager. He liked veteran players, so we made some deals, picked up Ray Herbert, I think, from one of the American League teams to add to the rotation, and things didn't go well again. Gene got blamed. Gene Mauch got blamed a lot for the collapse in 64, but he wasn't for his managing, we wouldn't have been in first place, in my opinion. we only had two healthy pitchers at the time, Jim Bunning and Chris Short, and he thought he could pitch them more frequently, steal a win, and that would be the end of it. And it didn't work out that way. We had a game against the Braves where Rico Carty hit a bases loaded triple, hit the chalk line in right field at Cunningham Stadium, and we lost the game. If it's foul, we win the game, and it's a different story. But we went to Cincinnati at the time for the last two games of the season. We beat them and knocked them out of first place, and St. Louis took over. And if St. Louis lost to the Mets on Sunday and we won, there'd be a three-way tie with the playoffs starting the next day at Cunningham Stadium. We won, and the Mets were ahead of the Cardinals, and the Mets were pretty pathetic in those days, and the Cardinals overcame them. They went to the World Series.
How were you guys following the Cardinals game? You couldn't pop the TV on in the press box on MLB TV.
There wasn't such a thing. I think we were listening to it on the radio. You know, it was a lot different in the old days.
And mid to late 70s, the Phillies built it back up, and then they finally broke through and won that first World Series in 1980. But they had made three straight LCSs, right, in 76, 77, and 78.
Yep. Yeah.
What do you remember about those teams?
They were good teams. The 1976 team had something that we'll never see again, I don't think, Greg. We used 11 total pitchers the whole season. 11.
The Blue Claws are carrying 18 as we speak.
Yeah, and sometimes 9 pitchers pitch in a game these days. It was totally different back in those days, obviously. It was the nucleus of the team was really good. Schmidt, Boa, Lazinski, Maddox, great defense. Manny Trio that came along. And then the big thing we did was signing Pete Rose as a free agent. And then we had a lot of injuries in 79. We didn't make it, but in 80, we won everything. And if we didn't have Pete Rose, I don't think we'd have made it to won the World Series. He was so instrumental on the team, a spark plug, a booster in the clubhouse with the players, and he said that if we win the playoffs, the World Series will be a piece of cake. And of course, we had 5 games with Houston that were really gut-wrenching, extra inning games. And we did win that. And the World Series was like a piece of cake after that series with Houston.
When Pete Rose broke the hit record, there was a funny story, right, with President Reagan. He was on the phone. Yes,
Pete knew everything. He was amazing. He knew who was pitching for the other team, who was hot, who was cold, and so forth. And we arranged for a press conference after the game because we had a lot of media at the Veterans Stadium. We had a big room behind home plate, which once was TV studio. And he and I are walking down there. He says, "I guess you got the president call me, don't you?" He knew. So we had a red phone sitting on the podium, and the White House called and said, "Just a minute, Mr. Rose." This went on for like 5 or 6 times. And Pete finally said, "I'll give him my cell phone if he needs it," And we finally got President Reagan got on the phone and says, "Good evening, Mr. Rose. How are you doing?" And he said, "I'm okay. How are you?" It was really a comical thing. It was a great thing. He deserved it. We had Stan Musial in town for a week, waiting to break the record so we could have him come out at first base. And it was a neat experience, a great moment in Veterans Stadium history. Then in 81, we were going to win again, I think. I don't think there's any doubt about it. We were really good. We had the players strike. 55 games were lost. We were the first half champions. Then it came with on the second half team champions. We didn't win the second half. We lost to the Expos in the playoffs. And that kind of was the downturn for that club at that time. In 83, we got in the World Series again, but it was an older team, and it only lasted 1 year.
And then built it back up. We'll get to that. Dallas Green, what do you remember about when he took over as manager in 79?
He came in, and Danny Ozark was a player's manager, and he kind of let them run the clubhouse and so forth. Dallas came in, and he was very stern. "We, not I," was his theme. He had signs in the clubhouse, and he would play rookies over. He would bench Maddox or Lazinski and play a rookie, and there was a lot of turmoil in the clubhouse. And he was very tough, very loud, very restrictive. but in the end, it paid off. 11/29, October 21, 1980, we won the first World Championship. And we won another one in 2008, but the first one was a special one because it was the first one.
Sure.
It was a great experience. The parade was awesome, unbelievable. I was privileged to be around in 2008, even though I wasn't a full-time employee anymore. And we had the parade then. It was a great parade too, but again, that first one was very special. You know, we grew up with those guys, Boa and Larry Christensen, Carlton. They were there 5-6 years, and they were about my age. So it was, no, they were younger than I was. Chris Wheeler was my assistant. They were his age. And they were a special group of players. And for years, the Whiz Kids were remembered by everybody. And then that time passed on and it became the 1980 team. And now that's passing on. And soon it'll be everybody remember the 2008 team.
What did that mean for the city? Like, could you tell the excitement for the whole city because it was the first one? You know, everybody talks about the Red Sox drought, but they had won a couple. They hadn't won from 1918 until
Right.
2004. But for the Phillies, that was their first one.
It was really unique. The parade, you could not believe the smiling faces you saw in the parade. Broad Street was packed. There were people on rooftops. There were people leaning out of windows. Some people climbed the traffic light poles. There were people in trees, you know, kids on the shoulders of their parents, and everybody was just smiling. It was a love fest. It really was. And Broad Street was packed all the way down to the Veterans Stadium. Then we went over to the JFK Stadium. There were 100,000 fans packed in there. It was just incredible, the experience that we went through. And it will never be matched because it was the first one. I know the Flyers won it and earlier than we did, but the impact that we had in '80 was just so huge. It helped the city. You know, we were the champions. Philadelphia was the city of champions.
Do you remember when they traded Ryan Sandberg, which would have been in '82?
Right.
Was he turned into Hall of Famer, of course. Was he considered like a big time up and coming prospect at that time? What do you remember about that trade?
He was a very good, talented athlete, was a quarterback in high school. We drafted him as a shortstop. There was difference of opinion. Dallas Green thought he was a second baseman or a third baseman. Paul Owens thought he was a center fielder. He wasn't the key guy in that deal. Dallas Green wanted Boa in Chicago for his makeup and drive and desire and feistiness. And Sandberg was included in the deal. He didn't do well at the beginning. He moved to third base early with the Cubs, and then Dallas moved him to second base, and he really took off. It was a tremendous player. And he came back to manage us later on, but then that didn't work out. But he was a great athlete.
So the Phillies obviously built everything back up late 90s or early 90s, and then 93 they have the special season, winning 97 games. Obviously lost the World Series to the Blue Jays. I had interviewed Mickey Morandini, who played here he managed here in 2012 and 2013, and I interviewed him a couple of months ago, and we were talking about that. And I said, when did you think that team had a chance to be pretty special? Because in 92 they only won 70 games. And he said there was an incident in spring training involving Tommy Green and the Pirates. So he plunked a guy, and Mickey thought, hey, everybody kind of came together really well. What do you remember most about the beginning of 93 and when you thought that team had a chance to be special?
Well, Mickey's exactly right. We did have a fight in spring training, which doesn't happen, but it united the team. And we had a bunch of tough people. We had the best leader I've ever been around, Darren Dalton. Dave Hollins was a tough person. And Cavilla was Lenny Dykstra just grinded out things. When we started the season off very well, I think we won our first 3 games. We went to Houston, won all 3 games there. And you could just feel it. Jim Fregosi did a great job managing the team. Darren Dalton ran the clubhouse and the field, and it was a great combination. We had platoons of Incavilla and Milt Thompson. Wes Chamberlain came along. Mariana Duncan. We had a hole of shortstop, but Kevin Stocker came up in the middle of the season, filled that hole. Mickey at second base, and Darren was the leader. Kurt Schilling, Terry Mulholland, Tommy Green. Tommy Green had his greatest year that year. Schilling was an animal on the mound. In 1981, all the zip for the Phillies fans was taken out because of the strike. We were the world champions, and I think we're going to win again. Well, in '93, that team captured the hearts of Philadelphia. And then we had a strike again in '94. And again, the city got sapped of all their enthusiasm for the Phillies in baseball. It was very difficult. And the team never gelled after that. A lot of injuries. They got older. But it was a unique experience. We were the first team that went from last place to first place. We battled the Blue Jays, who were the defending champions. They had a game at Veterans Stadium where we're killing them in the 6th inning or something like that. And they let the pitcher bat. And it was always like saying they were waving the white flag, but they came back to win a game. And that was the one that crushed us. But we had the lead in Toronto in game 6. And then Joe Carter hit the home run to clinch it and end it for us. Our bullpen was out of gas at that point. We were not supposed to beat the Atlanta Braves, but we did. We had this team was known as a wild bunch, hillbillies, misfits, weirdos, but they could play baseball. And the city had really, they were blue collar workers, and that's what the city loved. They were tough. They had beer bellies. A lot of beer drinking, but maybe that was the way you won. So it was a very close-knit team. After every game, they'd be in the clubhouse. They'd go to the trainer's room, all 25 of them in there, and they'd review the game and talk about what mistakes were made and on their side and what they can do to win and how you should pitch a certain guy that we didn't do right and so forth. And it was a unique bunch, a very unique bunch.
Darren Dalton obviously means a lot to you. He's the first player that you mentioned. Looking back now, what stood out most to you about his amazing career?
He was tough. He really was tough. He had a lot of injuries, overcame all of them. He battled all the time. And then in 1997, Dave Dombrowski was the general manager of the Miami Marlins, and they were in the lead in the division. They had a chance to go to the postseason, and he picked up Darren Dalton in a trade. And Darren was in Miami for 3 days. And then he held a clubhouse meeting and let them know. And he was the reason they won that year in the World Championship. He got a ring that year, and he was not there very long. But he was a great leader. He could pat a player on the back. He could grab the player by the throat and put him in the locker and put him in the corner. And he had a lot of respect. He was just tough as nails, just absolutely tough. And unfortunately, he wound up with a brain tumor and died very early, much too early.
Harry Kalas, you were there when he came to Philadelphia from Houston in 1971. How did he win over the hearts of Phillies fans?
Well, when we got him, it wasn't very popular because we replaced him. We replaced Bill Campbell with Harry Kalas, who was an unknown from Houston. There's an interesting story there. Bill Giles' first person he wanted to hire was Al Michaels, who was with the Reds at the time. But Al passed on it, and then Bill brought in Harry from Houston because Bill was in the Astros when Harry broke in down there. Harry Kalas, after every game at the Veterans Stadium, he parked in the parking area near where I parked, and fans would be waiting for his autograph. He signed every autograph every night for everybody and would do things. People would call him to do tape a recorded message for their cell phone and so forth. He did it. He did a lot of banquets, speaking, and he was just the combination of he and Richie Ashburn. I don't think you're going to see that anymore. It was just a unique pair. Whitey with his homespun humor, Harry with his great voice, great calls. Just brings you a lot of goosebumps when you think about it.
You grew up a Phillies fan?
Yep, huge Phillies fan. Yeah.
So now you're the PR guy and in charge of that. Steve Carlton comes in. What's it like for you, a young Phillies fan, watching obviously one of the 10 best pitchers of all time?
He was unique. We were fortunate to get him from the Cardinals. They had a salary conflict with the Cardinals. He wanted $65,000. I think they wanted to pay him $60,000, so they traded him, which we were glad to do. His year in '72 was just 72 was just unreal. He dominated, won 15 games in a row, won the first of 4 Cy Young awards. He was so cooperative with the media, with fans, and after a while, he started getting concerned about the media. He told me one time, "Why should I talk to them? Everything I say, they take out of context." So he adopted a policy. It was very simple. Policy is policy. That was his answer. And that made my job easier because the media knew that was his policy. And I think the media respected him because he was consistent about it. That was it. No matter what the approach was, policy is policy. And sometimes the athletes are hot and cold with the media, and that creates issues that you have to work through. But he was consistent. He was dominating on the mound. Today they get nervous when a pitcher goes through the batting order for the 3rd time. Don't tell lefty that. Don't tell lefty batting order 3rd time. Complete games, strikeouts, dominating. He had a slider that was just lethal, and he was a very unique person. The day he pitched, you didn't get around him in the clubhouse. You stayed away from him because he was so focused, and you didn't small talk or anything with him because you need to stay away from him. We have some pretty good pitchers in the club right now, Nola and Wheeler and Eflin, but they got a long way to go to match a Steve Carlton.
Oh, everybody in baseball has a long way to go to match a Steve Carlton. Mike Schmidt, so he comes up in 1972, just a few games, and then he quickly establishes himself. 73, hit below 200, and then after that, led the league in homers 3 straight years, hit over 500. What did he mean to the Phillies and that whole era as the organization kind of elevated itself and ultimately won their first title in 1980?
Well, he and Carlton were the guys you were going to build around all the time. I mean, Luzinski was with us, then we traded him and Boa, I think 81 or 82 in there. Maddox was with us till 83. But when you have a Carlton and a Schmidt on your club, you can build around them pretty easily. And Schmidt obviously is the greatest player we ever had. He wore our uniform for 18 years. That's the only uniform he wore. Nobody wore it that long. All-Star, Gold Gloves. He did it all. First ballot Hall of Famer, as was Lefty. And he had a tough time sometimes with the fans. He was kind of an introverted person, and he said some things on occasion that rubbed the fans wrong. But in the end, they recognized what he was and how special it was to have him around for 18 years. And now he comes in as, he's part of the organization, spends some time with their sponsors and so forth, but he also is on TV on Sunday home games. So he's been around, he's doing well. He was a shortstop in college. We drafted him in the 2nd round. And the guy that Kansas City took before him, we were the 29th pick. They took him at 28th, George Brett. So it was amazing that 2 Hall of Fame third basemen went right back to back.
When the Phillies left the Vet to go to Citizens Bank Park, obviously the Vet had been a older venue by that point, and that Citizens Bank Park becomes this new, baseball cathedral that certainly held up over the last, almost 20 years now. But the Vet had its own personal charm. What was everybody's reaction leaving the Vet, and obviously the conditions for everybody? I'm sure for you, for the players, for your staff, everybody jumped up 20-fold from the Vet. But the Vet was a special place in itself.
Yes, it was. We were there for 33 years. And the Eagles were critical of the Vet and the AstroTurf and some of the conditions, but that was our home for 33 years. Generations, that's all they knew of the Veterans Stadium. It was the last year, which was 2003. We planned a whole season events, the final innings, and we capped it off with a great post-game show at the end of the last game, where we had alumni on the field, creating one more memory, one more tear for the fans. And then the following March, it was imploded, which was an emotional experience too. But Citizens Bank Veterans Stadium was a stadium. We wanted a ballpark. We didn't need 65,000 seats. We wanted something that was more cozy, closer to, the fans could be closer to the field, and we could play on natural grass again. So we had toured many of the ballparks that were being built in that era. Camden Yards was the first one. Bill Giles came back from Camden Yards one time. He said, we have to get a ballpark like that. That's what we need. And we finally get it done in 2004. The Citizens Bank Park is just an awesome, awesome ballpark. We're blessed in our minor leagues too. Allentown has a nice ballpark. He's done a great job with the older ballpark. And of course, you guys have a great ballpark down there in Jersey Shore, Blue Claws.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to get that through my mind. I'd call them Lakewood.
It took me, when we were calling the games the first week, it took me until like the third or fourth game before I didn't have any errors with Lakewood. But yeah,
I can imagine that. And a lot of our players came through Lakewood and Reading and Clearwater. Clearwater, it's, as we all know, Major League Baseball took over the minor leagues and rearranged a lot of things. We're fortunate that three of our teams were in our area because we had planned that a long time ago to make it much more simple for our staff and everybody to look at all the players in the minor leagues instead of, we had minor league teams in Portland, Maine, Oregon, San Diego before the Padres, and we were scattered all over the country. But back in, I guess it was the early 2000s when we decided to set up the trio, we call it, from Lakewood, Allentown, and Reading. And of course, Clearwater is our base. It's always going to be our base because that's where the Gulf Coast League starts and so forth. So we have a good setup, I think. We have a good situation for our players. And we're very fortunate.
Phillies were one of the first organizations to really think that forwardly, going back 20 years.
Yeah, we were. Dave Montgomery gets credit for that. So, we were bouncing all over the place. If you wanted to move a player from AA to AAA, it took a while to get from some of our. We were in Macon, Georgia, one time, and
now it takes 45 minutes.
Yeah, now it's much more simple. But your roving instructors can go from Lehigh to Reading to Lakewood without a lot of trouble. Save a lot of expenses on it. So it's a great setup. We were fortunate when baseball changed everything that we didn't have massive changes as some organizations did.
David Montgomery, so he comes into the organization as a ticket salesman. He ends up running the whole thing. And you were obviously well established by that point. At what point did you become aware of him and, kind of view him as a guy who was going to be obviously a legendary figure in Phillies history?
He was, I went to spring training in 71, I think it was. Just before I went, he came in there. He came into the organization in the sales office. And I thought he was an intern. There was no major announcement or anything. And now it's September, he's still there. And then he went into the sales and he became Bill Giles' executive vice president when Bill bought the team in 81. And then he eventually replaced Bill as the president. He followed the mold of Bill. The Bill set the tone for this organization. We were a family front office. We worked hard. We had a lot of fun. He got the Phillies involved in the community. He helped build the ballpark. It was the idea to get a ballpark. We had the All-Star game in '76 to help Philadelphia celebrate the bicentennial. He was very instrumental in turning the Phillies around, because we were at Connie Mack Stadium, Greg, we had 11 full-time front office employees.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And then we went to Veterans Stadium, and he was brought in to make that transition for us, because he had done that with the Astrodome in Houston. Built it when they built that. He moved the team in there, and he was the best thing I think the Carpenter family ever did, bringing him to Philadelphia.
I'll tell you, I know you're telling the stories, but I'll tell you a quick one, which I had heard. I wasn't with the Blue Claws at the time, but in 2001, the Blue Claws opened their new stadium. So the first game was on a Tuesday, and a game got suspended by rain. So the next day they finished the first game and play the second game. And the second game, the Phillies had a bus or two bus loads of staff members that came out to, enjoy the game and help open the stadium. So they finished the first game, and now they start the second game. And I guess the Phillies had a game in Philly that started the next night. So some of the people were getting a little anxious and wanted to leave. And but David was in charge, of course, and the pitcher for the Blue Claws was throwing a no-hitter. Like he apparently what was told to him was like, they said, all right, he said, all right, we'll get ready to go. But he never liked to leave a game early, ever.
No.
And but they had been there for a while. They had a long ride back to Philly. Then everybody had to go home, and then they had to be back early the next day. Well, they look up at the scoreboard, and it's like the fourth or the fifth inning of game 2, 7-inning game, and the pitcher was throwing a no-hitter, so he wouldn't let anybody leave. They stayed to the last out. The pitcher named Keith Bucktrot finished off the no-hitter, and then only then was everybody allowed to go home.
Yeah, that's David. David always finishes everything. That's his personality was. He was very seldom on time for things. We could go on airplanes, commercial flights, and he'd be walking in the plane just before the door closes for the final time. He had a memory that you couldn't believe. He was so organized and so detailed. We'd have meetings, and he'd tell you how to do something. You'd sit there and say, well, why didn't I think of that? He was an amazing person. He knew the first name of every employee in the organization, even the trainer down at the Dominican Summer League staff. It was incredible. He spent time going to all the minor league teams. He thought it was important that the minor league staff see him from time to time. So,
oh yeah, he would come to 2, 3, 4 games a year in Lakewood.
Yeah. And he wound up getting that cancer, and he didn't slow down. He still was driving and pushing and didn't quit. And he was a unique person, really a unique person. He was a great Phillies fan, as a kid. Robin Roberts had a game in 1953 where he gave up a home run to the first batter of the game against the Reds, and then pitched and retired the next 27. And I knew David was a big Phillies fan. I said, David, tomorrow's the anniversary of Robbie's one-hitter, blah, 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 blah. I was at that game. He said, I was at the game. So he was a great fan, great fan.
The Phillies built back up towards their 2008 championship, and then had a great few-year run. Ryan Howard, of course, played for the Blue Claws when he came through in 2002, and then he had some just unbelievable seasons in the mid to late 2000s. What do you remember about him when he came up? You were still, in your PR role, and then he has the huge year as Rookie of the Year in 2005, and then he wins MVP a couple of years after he was playing for the Blue Claws.
Well, he was the big piece, is what Charlie called him. He really was. I mean, Rollins, Utley, and Howard, that doesn't come along very often. And Ryan, he was a 5th round draft pick. He didn't do well his sophomore year in college, or junior year, I guess it was. And I was talking to Ed Wade recently, and Ed said, if we had the analytics evaluation of amateur players, we would have never drafted Ryan Howard, because he struggled. But the scout out there, a guy named Jerry Lafferty, wouldn't give up. He kept pestering the Phillies. You got to take this guy. You got to take this guy. He said, analytics would look at the spreadsheets and video, and they said he's not a 5th round pick. Said, well, we did it, and credit goes to Jerry Lafferty for hanging into that. And of course, we had Jim Thome at the time too. So what do you do? So we put Ryan in left field at AAA, but that didn't work. He was not that great an athlete. And it all ended though in 2011 when he tore his Achilles heel. I mean, that just was the end of it. And he had a rehab, I believe, at Lakewood one time.
A few times. He had, in 07, he was hurt and he was coming back and he rehabbed in an 11:05 a.m. game in May. It was a school day.
Yeah.
And then that night, Roger Clemens pitched in Trenton. So we had a lot of the Philly media came over because I believe the Phillies were home that night. So they could double up because we played at 11. So they came over, covered Ryan's game, went back to Philly. And then there were a ton more media that would just cover it from a New Jersey baseball standpoint where you had him and Roger Clemens. They could hit both because Trenton played at night on the same day. And then Ryan came back again 3 years later in 2010, and we retired his number 29. And then he played in the game. Long story, but we were supposed to retire it on an off day. The off day got canceled because they had a game snowed out in Colorado. Anyway, so he ends up getting hurt. He rehabbed, we retired the number pregame. He played in the game and he was great. But yeah, I've called a few of his games and worked, he worked a few games where he played, and then he came back again in 2012 to rehab. So yeah, he's made a lot of appearances since he played here.
He's a good man. He's a good man. They were all good men, Jimmy, Jason, and Ryan. And again, it's going to be a long time before you see that kind of quality on the team. 3 players like that. I mean, I still don't understand how we didn't win in 2011 with that pitching staff. It's very hard to believe that we didn't win it. It was such a great team. I think it might have been our best team ever. But our best team in
I think you're right.
The 77 team we didn't win. So
Charlie Manuel is having a legendary baseball career from all over the place. He was like a special assistant before he became the manager.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So was he embraced by the city right away? And obviously he became a World Series winning manager a few years later.
No, absolutely not. He was not embraced. Charlie had a little trouble explaining himself after games, and there was criticism that he was an American League manager, didn't know how to manage in the National League with double switches and stuff like that. And he was heavily criticized. And then we started winning. And now Charlie is treated like a rock star in Philadelphia. Everybody loves Charlie Manuel, and it's understandably so. He certainly deserves it. It was fun to be around Charlie. It was really fun to be around him. He had his own ideas. He loved to talk hitting. He could talk hitting until you're blue in the face, And he still works for us. He goes to the minor leagues, goes to spring training. And when you go to the ballpark, there's a figure standing behind home plate, leaning on the batting cage. It's Charlie. That's his home.
Favorite ballpark outside of Philly that you got to travel to?
Well, Dodger Stadium was always very unique. I haven't been to some of the new ones. I was not impressed with Wrigley Field. Everybody loves Wrigley Field, but from a media standpoint and an amenity standpoint, it was not a very accommodating place for the media, the visiting media. I was only in San Francisco once. That's a unique setting on the Bay. I enjoyed St. Louis and Cincinnati because you could walk to the ballpark from the hotels. You didn't have to take the bus because they were in downtown. That was a unique experience too. Of course, I love Jack Russell Stadium in Clearwater and the new ballpark, which is now Baycare Ballpark in Clearwater. Spring training was the best part of the whole job. There was no pressure for winning and losing. The media and the managers were getting along with each other. We played day games. You had your nights to yourselves. You were in Florida where it's nice and warm while it was cold and gray and cloudy up in Philadelphia. And I always wanted to play 162 games in spring training and then 10 back north.
How many games, when you started, how many games did they play in spring training? Now they play 50.
Spring training, we probably played maybe more than a dozen areas, something like that. We didn't have
it's crazy.
When I was 64, so games were rained out because you didn't have a tarp. We didn't sell tickets. We gave tickets away. There was a professional softball team in Clearwater called the Clearwater Bombers. their players were better known than Johnny Callison or Dick Allen or any guys in the 64 team. They were more popular. But after a while, we settled in there, and Clearwater became our home. Paul Owens, to his credit, was the one that came up with the idea and designed the Carpenter Complex. And then we moved from Jack Russell to the new ballpark. We opened 2 ballparks in 2004. I don't think any team had ever done that. One in spring training and then one back north in Philadelphia. I was there for the closing of 3 ballparks, opening of 3 ballparks. I had a great run that way. I traveled somewhat, and I would go to the World Series and I think, gee, I wish we could win in Philadelphia, because I was in St. Louis when the Cardinals won, and I'm walking back to the hotel and the whole town's going nuts, and they're cheering and hugging and drinking and all that. And I thought, Jesus, we need to experience this in Philadelphia. And we finally did it, in 80.
How did you
special,
How did you get the nickname Baron?
I was working at the News Journal in Wilmington, Delaware, and I was on the morning paper, which meant I worked from 4 in the afternoon to 2 o'clock in the morning. The sports editor, Al Cartwright, worked in the daytime. We had cubbies for mail, and he would put notes in there with assignments and critiques, criticism, and so forth. And he always addressed mine as Baron von Schenk, because of a German name, Schenk, and somehow it stuck. And when I got into baseball, everybody called me the Baron, and it's the way it is. I'm the Baron.
Last question. We talked about so many people, and we didn't talk about so many other people, but who is a guy that maybe we haven't touched on, a manager that you had a great relationship with, or just somebody that you kind of stay in touch with that stands out over the years?
Well, I think the person that was more special to me than anybody was Darren Dalton. The 93 team was very difficult with media relations and fan relations. He understood all that, and he would help those of us in PR if we needed a player to do something. And my wife answered his fan mail for him, because he said it was just too much for him to keep up with, and he just treated her like a queen. She later on wound up with some knee problems, was in a nursing home. He came to visit her. We saw him in spring training. We go to Florida in the wintertime and have dinner with him. He was just a special person, very special person. He was the closest one. I think I was, the 64 team, I was close to a lot of those guys, because I was the same age as them. Bobby Wine and we both lived in Norristown. And so we spent time together as a player. When you're in the front office, you need to get along with the players, but you don't want to become too friendly with them, because you're still management and they're not, and so forth. You're going to wind up writing press releases where you traded the guy or released the guy.
Yeah.
I remember writing a press release that Ruben Amaro Jr. was born, back in 65, I think it was. So there's a lot of people in baseball. Baseball people are unique, I think, and athletes in baseball are unique. Robin Roberts would tell me details about a game he pitched in. Rick Wise and I talked last week. His no-hitters 50 years ago, coming up June 23rd, he talked in detail about every pitch in that game. It's amazing how they remember all that information. I don't know what it's like around pro basketball players or pro football players, if they have the same capabilities, but baseball players are unique that way.
You still watch every game or most games?
I watch every game. My mobility is not good anymore, Greg, so I can't get around too much. I haven't been to the ballpark in 4 years. I don't think I'm going anymore. I have a lazy boy chair and a TV. What more do I need?
That's all you need. Well, Larry, I kept you like 20 minutes longer than I said, but I appreciate your time. This was great. Had a lot of fun. Enjoy the baseball season. And if you do get out to a ballpark, you're welcome to swing by Jersey Shore anytime you want.
I'd love to. Thank you very much, and good luck to you guys. I'll be following you.